Hello everyone, I'm Exodia, and today we're doing part 4 in our Roblox Scripting Beginner series, and this is probably starting to get to the content that I'm most excited to talk about. Today we'll be going over if statements, remote events, and built-in functions. So let's right-click Server Script Service and make a brand new script, and let's get started. I'm gonna call my script for organization purposes Roblox Scripting Beginner Series Episode 4. You can call your script whatever you want as long as it helps keep you organized. So let's get into if statements. If statements, also known as conditional statements, can be broken into three simple terms in Roblox scripting: if, then, and else. Usually, if you're programming in another language, they will drop the then, and it'll usually be like your conditions inside parentheses, and then you drop the line afterwards. But in Roblox's sake, we have a then tacked on the end of the line. How would you make an if statement? So, you'd write if, and then, and then you could drop a line. In between the if and then, you have a condition. Now, what is a condition? A condition usually, in this case, would be a check. For example, checking to see if a value returns true. Like, for example, if 2 plus 2 equals 4, this would be a true value. So long as this condition is a true value, then the code inside this if statement will run. So, for example, if you have 2 plus 2 equals 4, then print 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. However, if 2 plus 2 does not equal, and this is how you do not equal, if you do a tilde, then an equal sign. If 2 plus 2 does not equal 4, let's say it's 3, like this is true as well, but for example, saying 2 plus 2 does not equal 4, this is a false statement. So, for this reason, it'll skip over this code, and it will not run it, which is where the else comes in. We can drop a line right here, write else, and then drop another line, and then it'll almost like it'll indent. And so basically, what this else means is that if our condition is not met, if our condition above in the if statement is not met, then it'll run a different section of code. So, if 2 plus 2 is not equal to 4, else print 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. Now, if we run this, because of how our if statement is set up, the else side will trigger. 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. If statements are more of a simple yet very useful tool in terms of scripting. They're not really hard to pick up and understand, yet they help so much for you to make different types of things if you're doing like a round-based system, for example. Also determining maybe you want to like give I don't know, but if statements are really useful for a lot of things when you're programming, and you will definitely, when you're making your game, you will most likely 100% use an if statements at least once inside of your code. They're pretty easy to execute. We could even throw some variables in there. So local dog equals 2, local cat equals 3. Then we could do if dog plus cat equals 5, then print the value, the sum was equal to 5. Else print the sum was not equal to 5. And then if we print this, boom, the sum was equal to 5. If we were to change one of these two variables, say we wanted to make cat equal to 4, this would be equal to 6, which is not 5. So as a result, it'll say that the sum is not equal to 5. Of course, this is more simple because we're just printing. Usually in this case, you'd want to put like your game code here or something like that. Usually, if statements are a really handy tool because they will allow you to make conditions to check. Say you wanna check. Say you have a bool inside a player, and you're doing like a round-based system, like maybe like almost like a time-based game, and you want to detect if a player is at the end. So you have a bool inside the player. Then you check if that bool which could be called like finished. You could check if finished is equal to true. So like for example, if finished equals true, then teleport player to the next stage. Else, we could reset or kill the player. If statements are a really useful tool, and without a doubt, you will definitely be using them at some point. At least once. It would be probably a lot more than once, but if statements are a really useful tool in general. I don't mean to be a broken record, but it's just a true statement. So now we will get into remote events. Remote events, what these allow you to do is you can communicate information from the client to the server and the server to the client. How Roblox Studio works with its structure and how usually all games work is that when a player joins your game, they have a client, and the server your game is ran on replicates information to the client, so they receive that information. Say you're making an RPG and you have an enemy, and the player kills that enemy. You're communicating that data that you killed the enemy to the server registers it, then maybe they'll spawn a new enemy because you want the enemies to respawn so they can kill more enemies and get experience so they can move on to new areas. Then that information will be conveyed back to the client so that they receive it and so they can kill the enemy again. So here what we'll go and do is we'll right click and replicate as storage, insert an object, and you can see it right here, remote event. Remote functions, not to be confused with remote events, these allow you to communicate information between two local scripts, which we'll get onto in the advanced or intermediate series. We'll not get into this in the beginner series. That's more the more advanced stuff that we'll get into later on. But you can communicate information between two scripts on the server or two local scripts. For now, we'll just do a remote event, and you can call this whatever you want. I'll just leave this as remote event. And so normally, how we would get this remote event is I'd make a variable for local replicated storage equals game::get service. This is a built-in function into Roblox Studio, and what it does is it allows you to get any type of service inside of Roblox Studio. All these things on the Explorer tab, these are considered services, and you can do a lot of things with them. Most of the time when you're getting a service, you'll usually get the player's service, the lighting service, replicated storage, server script service, server storage, starter GUI, starter pack or starter player. Most of the time in my scripting experiences so far. These are the main biggies that I've used get service to get. So for now we'll get replicated storage. And so this will make sure that when the player is loaded in, we'll be able to get the replicated storage instantly so we don't have to wait on it. Which could cause yields in your script, preventing them from being able to run. So we'll make a variable for local remote event equals replicated storage, and then here's where our built-in functions come in. I will get into these more after we're done covering the remote events in this video, but usually what we do to make sure that, once again, like I talked about with getting replicated storage, using one built-in function called :wait for child, we are able to, and we put open close quotations, we are able to get the name of our remote event. So we type in remote event, and so what this allows us to do is we are able to get this remote event when the player joins the game. Basically, we're waiting for that child in the script so that it doesn't cause any issues in our script. It's basically grabbing that item. We're waiting on it to load into our game so we can grab it. This way that we have it and it won't cause any issues later on. Because if we just refer to example, right, replicated storage dot remote event, as opposed to doing :wait for child, then maybe yeah, we have the code getting the remote event inside of our replicated storage. However, it doesn't spawn in time when this line of code runs. It may not spawn in the game in time, so it ends up being a nil value. So that's why we do wait for child remote event. And so what we can use this for is we can let's make a tool, and then we'll put a local script inside this tool. And so we'll have to do the same thing. We'll get the replicated storage using get service, game : get service, open close quotation marks, replicated storage. Then make a variable for the remote event with a wait for child remote event. Now here's where the magic happens with remote events. Here's how we use them. So when you're on the client side of things inside of a local script, you'll write the name of your remote event, or your remote event dot. In this case, if we're invoking it on the client, we'll do dot on, or if we're receiving information on the client, we'll do on client event connect function. And then whenever this remote event is fired on the server down to the client, then anything inside of this function will run. So we'll just do print event received on the client. And let's go back into our server script. And we'll do remote event. And here's how you fire the event. You could do remote event. There are two ways you can fire to the client. You can fire client. In this case, you would need to give a player parameter, but we do not have a player. We can get a player parameter if we do game.players.player added connect function. This is a built-in function inside of Roblox Studio that triggers every time a player joins. Inside of the parameter, the first parameter will always be the player that joins, the name of them, or like their object. So we can do whatever here when the player joins, and then we can fire this remote event to their client. Usually we'd have to remotely fire this. We'd have to fire this remote event inside of this function with the player as the parameter. And now there is another way that you can invoke the client. Maybe you don't want to just invoke the client of a single player, but you want to invoke everybody. You want to inform everybody of this. So you could do fire all clients, and you don't have to pass a parameter here. So I will show you that this works both ways. And I can also show an example of it on the client side. Oh wait, I do not believe I Usually, by the way, when you use fire all clients, say you're in like a run-based game and you wanna maybe just display on every player screen who won, you'd use fire all clients. Or if you want to display a change to GUIs to all the players in the game, you do that. I'm not sure why this isn't running, but I think a better example would, maybe it's because the tool is not inside the player. Because their client is not going to get it if they don't have the tool. Yeah, that's why. Okay. Yeah, when it comes to making tools in Roblox, the player, for any of the scripts inside that tool to run on their client, now we could actually see if we could make sure that that was an oversight on my part. I'm sorry about that. But whenever you make a tool on Roblox, you have to, in your game, it's always important to make sure if you want the player to be able to use that tool, it has to be in their backpack. If you put it in starter pack, then usually they'll keep that even if their character is reset or they die. Yeah, you can see we got the data received twice. Now, I'm gonna write some simple code. On the client side, I'm gonna make a variable for the tool. Tool activated. This is a function for tools. Whenever you left click, it'll activate the tool, allowing you to do. Maybe you have a sword, you could swing the sword, or you have a pistol and you want to shoot the pistol. You can do that inside of this function. So we will, on here, we will do :fire server. We do not need to pass a parameter because automatically, when the server receives a remote event from the client, the player that sends the client is passed as the first parameter automatically. So if we do remote event dot on server event :connect function player, we can print player. And here's something that I probably should have talked about before. If we do 2 dots inside of a print, we can concatenate, and this will combine object names with strings. So this is, we could do player.name, this will get the name of the player, and then these two periods are concatenate, and then we do open close quotation marks, we have the space for the proper grammar, and then we do player fired an event from their client. Now if we play this, and then we pull out our tool and left click, maybe if I put a part inside of it, there we go. As you can see, we're getting the information on the server. So yeah, for the sake of this example, of course, tools are a very common instance of when you are using remote events. For example, a game like Ninja Legends 2 or Ninja Legends 1, or even back when it was popular, Saber Simulator, or like most simulator games, when you have that item that you start with, and you pull the tool out, and then you start like swinging it or doing something with it, and then you get some sort of like currency for doing that. That usually has like a remote event structure where you have a client-side script inside of that tool. You left click to use the item, and then it fires the remote event to the server, gathering the information on the server that this client had swung their tool. Then it awards that. Then it fires a client, or it adds points to that player on the server ends of things, so they actually get the point. Just because you have to add that, you have to do that on the server, because if you do it on the client, it will only be temporary data. Like for example, say your player joins the game and they start with 100 points. If they get points on the client, then they will not keep those points. Say if they did a transaction of like minus 25 points, say they got like 100 points from their client side swinging, and they would think they have 200 points, but when they do that transaction for 25 points, it gets reset back down to 75. That's why it's important that you use remote events, because they allow the server to handle things, which makes permanent changes for clients in the game. So the last thing I'll talk more in depth on is built-in functions, and there are mainly 2 I want to focus on. And that would be :wait for child and :find first child. We talked about get service. That is also a really useful function in Studio, and we also talked about some stuff like the on-server event, on-client event, and when a player joins, that as well. There are lots of built-in functions that are relatively easy to learn when you learn like the API, and I do highly recommend, especially when you're learning new topics, to browse the API, as you can learn all the calls and all the the functions and all like the syntax of the topic. But for now, we'll talk about two very important and vital and built-in functions to be used inside of your game. And I guarantee you'll use these as they help with like loading times and whatnot. And that's :wait for child and :find for child. As we already talked about, :wait for child will wait for that item that you are requesting inside of the parameters to be loaded into the game. And then you could use that item wherever. Say you had multiple remote events, and you wanted to find a specific one. Yes, you can also do wait for child, which if you print remote event, it will print remote event too. However, there is also replicated storage : find first child, and this would be string name would be the first parameter. Just like with wait for child, that's the main thing we'll focus on. The bool recursive isn't important right now, but the string name would be the item name. So say you wanted to, what find first child does is it'll search through a table of items for the specific named object that you give. Say we want to find remote event 4. Usually this works when everything is loaded in, because it does not wait for it to be loaded in. It's usually just searching for it. So typically, say you're making a tower defense game, and then you're placing a tower, and then you use your remote event to fire it, so it gets added into the server. Maybe you'd put it in a folder. Because it doesn't start out in that folder beforehand, then you can use :find first child to find the tower name in there, or wait for child even. Well, more so find first child, because that you're looking for a specific object inside the folder that you put in there, the tower that you placed. But either way, as we'll see, these two run. I believe find first child does actually do a wait, and it also it basically searches through the table of items inside of a folder or something like replicated storage for the specific item. Find first child and wait for child are two pretty simple topics that are pretty useful throughout scripting, as they allow you to ensure that things are being loaded in and being used properly, and no errors are occurring in your code, because if things do not load in, then your code can error and your whole scripts can break, because when you get an error, your whole script stops and it's like, halt, something bad has happened. So yeah, these are three relatively easy topics to learn. However, they're very exciting, because now we're digging into like the real good stuff when it comes to scripting, where we can actually do very fancy things. So yeah, these things will come easier with repetition upon use. The more you use them, then they will definitely become easier to understand. I know that was a big rule of thumb for me. The more I used these topics, then the easier they became for me to understand. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And if these videos are helpful, always remember to subscribe and like, as I will be posting 2 a week. So yeah, stay tuned for the next one on Sunday.